Hi class, this is Mrs. Brown. I'm taking over for Mrs. Sargent today just to do the geometry parallel lines lesson. I may pick up a few others later, but for now, this one is good enough. Today, our outcome is we will recall special angles formed by intersecting lines. Those are special angles that you already should know about from last year and the year before. We'll just kind of refresh our memory of them and then move on to things that are new and a little bit more difficult. We're also going to identify and determine the measures of angles formed by parallel lines when those parallel lines are cut by a transversal. That might be a new vocabulary word for some of you, and you may want to, when we get to that slide, write it down. Are you ready? When two lines intersect, special pairs of angles are formed. Do you remember what they might be called? Some of the ones that you have already learned or are already familiar with. I'm going to pause for a minute and allow you to think of a few of those. I hope you remembered vertical angles. Those are two angles that are opposite one another, and we'll recall those in a minute. They are opposite of one another, and they are the same angle measure, and we'll talk about them in a minute. I hope you remembered adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are neighboring angles. Those are angles that you are next door to. So you are adjacent to your neighbor's house when you're in your house. And the last one, supplementary angles. And supplementary angles have a special property that they add up to. So here we go. Adjacent angles. Like I said, those are the two angles that are next door to one another. There are four pairs of adjacent angles on this intersecting lines diagram. These two are adjacent angles. These two are adjacent angles. These two can be adjacent angles. And these two can be adjacent angles. So we have four pairs of adjacent angles. Those adjacent angles add up to one value. Do you remember what value that is? We're going to get to it in our next slide. The next pair of angles are called supplementary angles. That's where adjacent angles come in. Adjacent angles, both of those are adjacent. Those two angles add up to a certain value, and you should be aware of that. Oops, hold on here. Pick the blue one. These two are supplementary angles. Anybody know? Supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. So if I had this angle, and we're going to call this angle angle A, and this angle angle B, angle A and angle B together equal 180 degrees. Angle A plus angle B equals 180 degrees. Okay? Oops, I'm going to back up a minute. Take a minute and recall supplementary and adjacent angles. Another pair of special angles are called vertical angles. Vertical angles are also known as opposites. These are the two angles that are next to one another. So if we have this one, we call angle 1, and this one we can call angle 2. Slide those in there. Angle 1 and angle 2 are called vertical angles because they are across from one another. They are opposite from one another, so we call them opposite angles as well. Vertical angles are congruent to each other. That means equal to each other. And so if you know the measure of one angle, you can easily find the measure of all the rest. Congruent is a symbol that you learned also. Just refresh your memory. It's an equal sign with a swivel above it. Okay? So if I were to say, if I knew the measure of angle 1, I could easily find the measure of angle 2 because it's the same. It's equal to it. And then if I went back and I looked at supplementary angles, I could find the measure of another one of a supplementary angle too. And we're going to try that. Okay? Okay, so we have this angle right here, and it's 55 degrees. If I were to ask you for the vertical angle measure, what would you say? I hope you said it was also 55 degrees because our vertical angles are alike. They're equal. They're congruent. So those two are congruent. What if I were to say the measure of this angle right here is, and we'll call it angle A, and I know that this one is 55 degrees, what would this one be? These two angles are adjacent angles. They're also supplementary angles. What would the measure of angle A be? I hope you said angle A has to equal 180 degrees minus 55. That would mean that angle A has to equal 125 degrees. Okay, I think you're ready for all the new stuff. Let's consider lines now. What types of lines are these? I hope you said parallel. They're parallel lines. And when two lines are intersected by another line, when parallel lines are intersected by another line, that other line I show here in red is called a transversal. Take a minute to draw yourself a pair of parallel lines and a transversal that cuts through it. A transversal is a line, array, or a segment that intersects two or more coplanar lines. It intersects rays and segments as well, each at a different point, so it is usually on a slant. Now, a transversal can be upright, but we typically see it as a slant. This is a new vocabulary term. That's why I put smiley faces underneath it. You need to take a minute, write that down, write down the definition before you move on. Okay, parallel lines and transversals and special angles is going to be the topic of the next mini section, and it's why we recalled all of our angles a few minutes ago. Okay, when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, they form a lot of special angles. Take a look at this diagram here. Take a look at this. There are lots of special angles right here, and I've labeled my angles by number. And the reason why I've labeled them by number is because we talk about them. Could you pick two numbers that are vertical angles from this diagram? Just pick a pair of vertical angles. I hope you said angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical, or angle 2 and angle 4 are vertical, or angle 5 and 7 are vertical, or 6 and 8. And how about supplementary? 1 and 2 can be supplementary, 2 and 3 can be supplementary, even 7 and 8 can be supplementary. Okay, so now we're going to learn some new ones. Our first new one is alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles are just as you can see on the screen. We look at our two parallel lines as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you have this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the stuff on the inside is the peanut butter and the jelly, and the lines are the pieces of bread. Okay, so when you're talking about interior, we're talking about everything on the inside of our peanut butter and jelly sandwich, our parallel lines. Now we're going to talk about alternate. So what do you think of when you think of alternate? This is a key word, alternate. We want things to alternate. So we're looking at alternate and interior. So 4 and 6 would be alternate interior angles, 4 and 6. 3 and 5 was another pair of alternate interior angles. And alternate interior angles are congruent. Congruent. Let me take some of this away so it goes back up. Nope. There we go. Alternate interior angles are congruent. That means that if I tell you that angle 4 is 50 degrees, then angle 6 is also going to be 50 degrees. And then we can figure out what angle 3 is based on the fact that 3 and 4 are supplementary. We can figure out what 5 is based on the fact that 3 and 5 are alternate interior angles. Okay, take a minute, draw yourself a diagram, make some notes on this. Alternate exterior angles. There's that same peanut butter and jelly sandwich. There's our lines. But look, there's no peanut butter and jelly on the inside. This time we're talking about the exterior, the outside. Same thing happens. Alternate exterior angles are 1 and 8 or 2 and 7. Alternate exterior. Alternate exterior angles are also congruent. This time I'm going to draw the congruent symbol. You guys have to get used to seeing it. Okay? Alternate exterior angles are also congruent. Take note of this and practice. If I said to you that angle 1 was 120 degrees, what would be the measure of angle 2? It's adjacent angle or supplementary angle. If one is 120 degrees, what would be the measure of angle 8? Remember, they're alternate exterior angles. They're both going to be 120 degrees. Take a minute, draw this diagram, copy down these notes. Okay, last one, corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are angles that are on the same side of a transversal. One's inside the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the other one's on the outside of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So angle 5 and angle 1 are corresponding angles. Angle 3 and angle 8 are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are also congruent. Put our congruent symbol in here. And we can look at them too. Take a good look at this. I'm going to highlight this. Look at this angle measure right here. Look at that. And look at this one that corresponds to it. Don't they look similar? They look like they go like this, crossed and up. They look very similar. Well, they are, because they are identical. They are congruent. So if you need to know what angle 5 is and you know what angle 1 is, angle 1's 100 and we'll say 150 degrees this time. Then angle 5 has to be 150 degrees. And if you know angle 1's 150 degrees, you can find out what angle 8 is as well, because you know what 3 is, and 3 corresponds to 8. So we have lots of angle pairs. Take a minute, copy this down, take your notes. Okay, here we go. Recap. Last bit. Name the special angle pairs that are formed by parallel lines in a transversal. Just pick a couple. Let's say we want to know what kind of angles 1 and 3 are. Well, 1 and 3 are, I hope you said vertical. What do you think 1 and 2 are? I hope you said supplementary. Okay, what do you think 3 and 5 are? I hope you said alternate interior. What do you think 2 and 8 are? They're on the outside. Oh, and they're on alternate sides of the transversal. Exterior, alternate exterior. And last, 3 and 7, they're on the same side. One's inside that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. One's on the outside. Whoops, that's not right. Sorry, Mrs. Brown made a mistake. They're corresponding angles. Corresponding. There we go. 3 and 7 corresponding. Sorry about that, folks. All right, I hope you learned a lot about special angles. You're going to need to study these and go eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.